Glad if you're joining me today around this emotionally intelligent selling, what the best do differently. I have put here how you can get in touch with me. I think that's important. If you want to reach out to me, there's my email address. There is no cost, no obligation to have a conversation. And I would love to have those conversations. Obviously, I love doing these live events. So, obviously, I also love talking to people as we go through this, especially about a topic that I've spent 40 years on and what I feel very strongly about. So, welcome. I'm glad you're here. Uh, if you have any questions or comments, please put them in the chat. I'll be checking the chat every once in a while to see if there's something in there that we could talk about. So feel free to do that. I'm going to be sharing some different graphics as we go through today because the reality is I want you to see why I think this is so important. I've spent 40 years, as I've said, working with salespeople, sales leaders. I've consulted, I've coached, I've trained, I've been a salesperson. I'm still a salesperson. When you own your own company, you're always a salesperson, right? But I want you to really get a sense of what the best do differently. And what I've learned over coaching and working with hundreds and hundreds of salespeople over the years, and especially what I've learned from those top performers, those people who really consistently perform at the top of all sales, that top 5%. Just a little pedigree for me. I have been a salesperson. I have earned President's Club, which is top 5% in two different companies. I've been sales manager of the year in another organization. And then I kind of turned into consulting and coaching and helping other people with what I've learned. And that's what I'm here to do today. So the next thing I want to share with you is the fact that I have recently put out a book. And this book is called Unlocking Sales Success with EQ. Now, the purpose of this live event is not to promote the book, although I'd love it if you would buy it and provide a recommendation or a review of it. But I've just felt so strongly that I want to put something together and get it out there for everyone that they can use this in a way that will help them. It's literally a guide, a field guide to how to infuse emotional intelligence into the selling process. So you notice it says the science and the practice of emotionally intelligent selling. Well, emotional intelligence is neuroscience. And I've studied that my whole life, along with psychology and all kinds of other things. But people especially, and salespeople specifically, what I want to share with you today, that you can go deeper in the book if you want to, is that most salespeople will never get to their full potential. And the one primary reason that happens is the emotional environment in their own minds and in the mind of the buyer. They can learn all kinds of sales techniques and tactics, whatever Challenger spin, Miller Hyman, all of the different sales techniques are wonderful and they're helpful, but they are trying to leverage influence. And that's okay. But what if you don't have a lot of influence? Well, where does influence come from? It comes from connecting with people and building trust. And you add layers of connection and trust on top of each other. And I'm going to show you in a minute the next slide, which is going to say that sales don't usually happen in the first sales contact. They happen somewhere down the road. So as a matter of fact, let's talk about this. Again, feel free to check this out. It's on Amazon. Let's talk about what happens most of the time. This is a graphic that I pulled off of LinkedIn several years ago by the National Sales Executive Association. I think it's really important to set the landscape here so we understand it. 48% of salespeople, about 50%, never follow up with a prospect. Why? 25% of salespeople make a second contact and then they stop. Why? 12% of salespeople only make 3 contacts and stop. Only 10% of salespeople make more than 3 contacts. Okay, turn the table. 2% of sales are made on the first contact, 3% on the second, 5% on the third, 10% on the fourth. 80% of sales are made on the 5th to the 12th contact. You know what the difference is? What do the best do differently? They have a different mindset. They understand that sales is about building those purpose-driven relationships. And you do that by connecting with people and by building trust so that you increase your influence bank account. And the more deposits of connection and trust you make, the more influence you have to spend with someone. This is where emotional intelligence comes in. If 80% of the sales are not made till the 5th to 12th contact, what are you doing in the first 4 or 5 or 6? You're building that connection and trust. And the way that you set that up is so important. Transactional selling is a mindset of a salesperson where they're putting their own needs first. It's like, I need to make a sale. I need to do this. I need to do that. I need to hit my quota. And that comes across in a sales interaction. And it's very off-putting to buyers and to prospects because they're going, well, it's all about you. What are you going to do for me? How are you going to solve my issues? Do you even care? Are you just trying to sell me something that isn't really going to help me, but it's going to help you? And honestly, that's the way a lot of buyers think. You know, there's a lot of skepticism. And by the way, I should have said this up front. It doesn't matter if you're a salesperson or a fundraiser or a business development person or an account executive. Doesn't make any difference what your title is. These concepts and these principles work in every place where you're influencing someone to buy into what you want them to. You know what? It also works in leadership, but that's a different live event. So I'll deal with that one down the road. The problem with this, and we're going to see that as we move forward, what percentage of the sales buying decision, I'm sorry, let me rephrase that. What percentage of the buying decision do you think is based on logic versus emotion? I've got a slide that's coming up about that. We'll talk about that. But I'm going to give you kind of a spoiler alert here. Only 30% of the buying decision is based on the rational logic. 70% or more is based in emotional drivers and emotional needs. So if you're seeing what you're seeing here, most salespeople are never reaching their full sales potential because something's going on that's limiting that. A lot of times it's self-limiting behavior. It's a mindset and self-talk that gets in the way. Things like, I can't cold call. I hate that. I'm not good at that. What if we reframe that? What if we say, I'm not good at that yet? What if we say, I can't do that, but it's worth figuring out how to do that? I'm not good at that yet. Those are the kinds of reframing that we want to think about when we create a good mindset. So let's move on here and start to talk a little bit about the different things that happen in a salesperson's day. So this is a graphic that I came up with. And if you know anything about the change cycle or the cycle of change, it's very simple. You're going through the day you have certain expectations. things that you think are going to happen and hope that are going to happen. All of a sudden, something happens. You get a rejection, you get a no, you get something happens, and it drops you into what I call this valley of despair. Okay. This low point where you have emotions like stress and anxiety and frustration and maybe anger. Uh, and the problem with emotions like that is they come in cycles and they come in waves, and it's very easy to get stuck in those waves. So eventually, you will move into acceptance and you will move into hope and moving forward. What do the best do differently? That's a promise I made you that I'm going to share with you. That period of time that they stay in the valley of despair, that low place of where those feelings of something, disappointment and fear and frustration and anxiety and all of that happen, they have minimized the time that they stay in that low place. They have found ways to move quickly out of that into acceptance and moving forward with hope. Well, how do you do that? Well, let's apply some emotional intelligence here. Self-regulation. What does that mean? It's regulating our emotional reactions. So how would we do that if we find ourselves in that low place? Well, we understand what the emotion is, we name it to tame it, and then we decide how to move forward. And we think more from a forward or future focus. We don't allow ourselves to ruminate and stay in that negative cycle of emotions. The emotion itself, whatever the emotion is or emotions, the intensity will reduce in 6 seconds. But if we keep re-triggering that emotion by re-triggering the event or reviewing the event in our mind, just replaying the video over and over, we stay in that negative cycle of emotions. So what the best do differently is they leverage emotional intelligence to move forward quickly. And they start to create that mindset, or have already created that mindset, where they know that it maybe a no is not a no. Maybe it's a not yet, or what did I miss? Now, when I'm in a situation with someone in a sales interaction, when I'm trying to sell someone a project or a proposal or something, and I start to see the cues that they're not buying in, right? They lean back, they cross their arms, they start to look at their phone or whatever. The worst possible thing you can do as a salesperson is to keep talking. You need to stop. You need to leverage your emotional intelligence to not internalize and take it personally. You need to stop and ask a good question or two. Hey, I must be missing something here. What are you thinking about right now? What are your concerns? Something to get the interaction back on track. But you're doing it from an emotional perspective, because if they're disengaged, if they're not curious, if you know what all those things are, they're emotions. And so we have to be able to understand what that looks like. So let's move on now and talk a little bit about, by the way, every human being goes through this cycle on a regular basis. You don't have to be in sales, although it happens a lot more, probably every day if you're in sales mode. So let's talk about now, what are the secrets? And I hope by the end of this time together, there won't be secrets anymore. They'll be out there, they'll be open. What if closing more deals wasn't about knowing more, but about feeling more? Well, what do I mean by that? Have you ever wondered why some salespeople selling the same products or services at the same price point are so much more successful than their peers? We've all seen it. If you've been in sales, fundraising, whatever, for any period of time, you've seen this, where some people are just consistently at the top of performance levels. Well, what's the difference? Well, that's what I'm going to share with you today. Now, here's here's what I want you to hear from me. What I'm going to share with you and what's in my book is not a replacement for a sales training or a sales technique or tactics. It is a multiplier of success and works with any of those because we're dealing with an entirely different dimension that the vast majority of those sales trainings and tactics do not deal with. And that is the 70+% of the sales decision and the buying decision that relies on the emotional drivers. So that's why this works with any techniques or tactics. Mindset is where we want to start. If you want to improve sales, you improve it from the inside out. So mindset is more critical than tactics. The mindset of the salesperson and the mindset of the buyer, we need to understand both of those. So let's talk a little bit more about what I mean by mindset and how does all this work? A couple of things from a scientific viewpoint. Now, again, the question is, what do the best do differently? Well, they do this without thinking about it. They understand that the buyer has emotional drivers. They might not understand everything I'm sharing today, but the top performers understand that buyers buy on emotion and then they rationalize with logic. And at least 70+% of the buying decision is based in emotional drivers. So the salesperson shapes the shared mind space that they invite the buyer into. The buyer will engage, they will come into that space if it's safe, if it's inviting, and if it's comfortable. Well, I want you to think for a minute of how our brains work. Everything we process comes through our emotional center first before it gets to our rational logical center of the brain. The emotional center is the limbic system in our brain, the amygdala being the primary driver of emotions. It sends out little neurotransmitters that are emotions that send messages to our brain. The prefrontal cortex is where we do our logical thinking, our logical reasoning, where we rationalize things, where we understand the facts, the details, and really strategic thinking, adaptive thinking, numerical reasoning. All of that happens in our prefrontal cortex. So sorry if you're getting more science than you want. I apologize, but I do enjoy that stuff. It's important for us to understand the buyer is going to feel what you're bringing into the interaction before they can logically understand it. Because we have these things in our brains called mirror neurons. Mirror neurons are emotional radar. They literally pick up the emotions of other people and other groups of people. Have you ever walked into a room and felt the mood of the room? That's your mirror neurons kicking in. You walk into a room and you feel everybody's down or depressed or disappointed or upset or whatever it is. And then there are other times when you walk in a room and you can tell people are happy, they're excited, they're joyful. That's your mirror neurons kicking in. Well, the same exact thing happens in every sales interaction you have with another human being. They're going to experience you emotionally before they experience you logically. What do top salespeople know? Well, the primary role of the salesperson has shifted from providing insight and information, which buyers can get online now pretty easily, especially with AI and technology, to becoming a strategic partner in the success of their client. That's what the best do differently. They understand it's a joint venture approach. It's a success partnership approach. And that has to come with a relationship that is built on connecting well and trust and just depositing connection and trust on an ongoing basis. Because we want to move from being seen as just another salesperson to the highest level of what that looks like, which is a trusted advisor. I literally have people call me today that I built relationships with and sold to over the years that will call me about things that I don't know very much about at all, but they want my opinion. That's a trusted advisor. They connect with you first when they have a problem. There really are three things, and I attribute this to my many times of being certified in Miller Hyman sales training. There are three things that people want. They want to fix something, they want to accomplish something, or they want to avoid something. And if we keep that in our mind, but underneath those three things are emotional drivers for every single one of those. So moving on, let me now give you some proof about a lot of what I've been saying, which again, maybe I should have moved up to the front of what we're doing here today. But this is not me saying these things are important. Okay. Gallup research indicates 70% of consumer decisions are influenced by emotional factors. Harvard Business Review suggests that emotional factors drive up to 95% of purchasing decisions. Beal Research, and this is fairly recent, 2023, 2,000 consumers found that 86% of buying choices were shaped by an average of 10 emotional needs. So again, this is not just me saying this is important. This is real research, real case studies, and research data. And so if you're only trying to use features and benefits and logic and facts and details to sell, you're literally accessing only 30% of the buying decision or less. 70% or more is based in emotional drivers and emotional needs. People buy on emotion and they rationalize with logic. So I recently did a blog article. I think this was last week. This week it's still on sales, but a little bit different. What makes emotional intelligence the new sales superpower? Well, let me tell you what the best do differently. They regulate their emotional state. What do I mean by that? If the buyer or prospect or donor is going to experience you, they're going to experience the emotional environment you're bringing into that interaction first. They're first going to experience that. Well, what does that mean? Well, emotions are contagious. So if they're going to experience what you bring into it, you need to bring into it the right things. Because if you don't bring into it the right things, what's going to happen? They're going to feel uncertain, uncomfortable, not safe. I mean, all of these things are so important. And it's why we're seeing the research say 70+% of the buying decision is driven by these emotional drivers. What do the best do differently? They tune into customer emotions or buyer or prospect emotions, emotional drivers. And I know there are a lot of people out there selling technology, selling engineering, selling whatever that won't agree with that. All I can say is the science proves it. And so the best are tuning in to what's going on. And by the way, even if you have a relationship with this person for many years, every buying and selling interaction could very well be different depending on what's going on in that person's life. So building this skill set of adaptive emotional intelligence skills so that you can take the pulse of what's going on with that buyer right now is critical, because that's going to help you better understand where they're coming from. And is this the right time to try and move things forward, or is this more of a continuation interaction? Because they're not there yet. They're dealing with some other things. People who learn how to sell that way, those are your top performers. You know what they also do? They create a calm, confident, and curious presence. I cannot state how important curiosity is. Many years ago, when I was a young salesperson, I realized that there was a very different way to sell. I was selling on tactics and techniques, but I had a mentor who was significantly my senior at the time, who just looked at me one day. He had been riding with me for a day. He said, "Steve, relax. Just relax. You have a wonderful personality. You People enjoy being around you. They feel comfortable with you, which is really a gift. Let that be a part of who you are in sales. Relax. Let people feel more comfortable and be curious, open-ended questions. Just let people lead you where they want to lead you." And you know what I found out? He was 100% right. People will sell themselves if you let them, but you have to practice active listening. You have to connect well. You have to understand what's driving where they want to go. If you do that, that's what we call emotionally intelligent selling. And by the way, emotional intelligence is 2 to 4 times more predictive of success than IQ. And that is study after study after study has proven that. Why is that important? Because emotional intelligence is something we can easily develop in ourselves. You can't change your IQ a lot. It just doesn't happen. That's more of a genetic kind of thing, but you can definitely change your EQ. And that's something I highly promote. Obviously, I've kind of poured my life into that, right? So let's go on and talk about some additional proof points here. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but high EQ salespeople generate 2 times more revenue. That's from the Hay Group. EQ training boosted pharmaceutical sales 31%. Sanofi managers improved 13%. That is not a negative 13%. By the way, that's just a separator there, the hyphen. Improved 13% after EQ coaching. So there's real evidence that this stuff works. And all of the ways to make it work are in the book. And I put it there for a reason. Now, let me give you one of my case studies. I worked with a business to consumer organization a few years ago. They gave me 1 year to infuse emotional intelligence into their sales efforts. At the end of 1 year, they had increased their revenue 28%, and they had doubled their net profit. Why? Because there's already a fixed expense with your salespeople and your travel, and all that stuff was already there. All we did was unlock more sales success by infusing emotional intelligence skills and approaches into what they were doing. What I call EQ fit smart selling. The mindset, the approach, leveraging emotional intelligence in sales interactions. That was my personal case study. And of course, I have many more, but that's the one that I use mostly because it really helps people understand what's possible. I mean, if you increased your revenue 28% next year, would that be good? That's probably an equal increase in commissions, which we all like commissions as salespeople, or incentive programs, whatever you happen to be in. I believe so strongly in all of this that many years ago, I developed an EQ specific sales assessment. I don't have time today to go deep into this. There's a couple of chapters in the book about it, but the fascinating thing to me, I promise you I was going to tell you what the best do differently. I want to show you, and it's a little hard to see unless you have super good eyes, which I'm not there as much anymore. But notice that where that little black diamond is up there under the sales styles, the key to that is very much the fact that that black diamond is an actual indicator of how you're showing up in your sales style with people. And that is, the closer that black diamond gets to the center of the axis, the more you can use all 8 of the different success factors. You know what the top 5% do differently? They have a very balanced profile where that little black diamond is almost in the middle of the circle, right at the intersection of the different axes. and they can use any of the 8 success factors. Now, again, I don't want to go deeply into this. This is available. If you're interested in this assessment, just reach out to me and feel free to ask more about this. We'll talk about it because what I found is this is a real-time measure of how somebody is showing up. What does that mean? Well, it basically means that you can work with someone, you can train them, you can coach them up, and you can continually measure their progress. How are they moving forward? In some industries, you may want to be more of an advisor, or maybe more of a negotiator, or more of a connector, or more of a generator, because it's better for your industry. All of that is described more in the book, and I'm happy to have that conversation with people. The point of this is hosted by 6 Seconds, which is the largest emotional intelligence organization in the world. It's a way that we can understand where we are. I believe in data-driven development. We need to know where we are today so we can move in the direction we want to go. Without the information, how are we going to know which way to go? How do you know what's going to be helpful and what isn't? How do you know where you are right now? That's a big part of self-awareness. This is a part of what the best do differently. They understand where they are right now. And by the way, they do regular self-assessments every day. They may do it several times a day. Where's my mind right now? Where are my emotions right now? This is a way to look at it from a more scientific approach and create a developmental pathway that can help people move forward. So let's talk a little bit higher level, okay? Here are the 5 competencies of emotional intelligence. And, this is really important for understanding how we apply and infuse these skills into an approach like sales. Bottom line, understanding your strengths and your weaknesses. That's self-awareness. It's also understanding your emotions and your patterns and how they impact you and how you're showing up for other people. All of that is packaged in self-awareness. Self-regulation is managing your emotions and your impulses. And it's so important to understand how to do that. How do you navigate a no? How do you navigate the emotions that come with an objection? You've got to find ways to do that and create patterns that are beneficial so you don't get stuck or you don't get shut down. I look at no, just a little tip here. I look at no as not yet. I haven't provided enough information. There isn't enough trust. Unless somebody looks at me and says, no, Steve, never call me again. Okay, that's a real no. But until you say that to me, I'm going to just figure it's not yet. But see, I've created that mindset for myself. Motivation, being driven to achieve goals, sales goals, empathy, understanding customers' perspectives. Let me go back to motivation for a second. Motivation is important because when you're in that low place and things are not going the way you want it to, what keeps you moving forward? Well, unfortunately, a lot of salespeople, the answer to that is nothing. They just stop. They give up for the day. I'm done for the day. And I've seen it over and over and over where salespeople give up at 1 or 2 o'clock in the afternoon or 10 o'clock in the morning. Motivation comes from your deepest held beliefs, values, and goals. That's intrinsic motivation that we desperately need to keep us going. Sales is a tough job. Fundraising is a tough job. You're going to get no's. You're going to get objections. You're going to get questions. People are going to question your trust. When I was a very young salesperson, one of my very first sales calls, I did my tactics so well and I lined it all up and I had the facts and details and I presented them and the guy across the table looked at me and said, "Why should I trust you?" And of course, emotionally triggered, I go, "Wait a minute, you're impugning my integrity?" What? And of course, he wasn't doing that. He was asking a very simple and important question. Why should I trust you? And that made me start to think about sales is more than tactics and techniques. It's a lot more than that. And I know that we kind of know that organically, but what I'm providing here is a framework for not just knowing it, but learning it, growing in these skills, and then being able to use those to unlock more success and, frankly, more satisfaction, more enjoyment in what we're doing. Empathy is understanding their perspectives and the emotional drivers that are driving them. And then social skills, building strong relationships with clients. That's important. Those social skills are where all the other emotional intelligence competencies come together and help us interact in a way that is very productive and helps us to keep moving forward. So, what advantage do we get out of this? Well, very simply, a more productive and focused mindset. You ever go through the day and get distracted? If you don't, please contact me. I want to know what you're doing. To be productive and focused in your mindset is the foundation of success. Excuse me. Navigate objections with ease. It took me a while to figure this one out. And I think it does for anybody who's in sales or fundraising or business development, whatever you want to call it, because you're going to get objections. And some of them may not make any sense, but there's a reason for it. And what they're saying may have nothing to do with what they're feeling. I have figured out with many people that they sometimes say something that really doesn't make a lot of sense, but they say it because they're feeling something where they're unsafe, they're uncertain, they're not sure, they're worried, they're frustrated, they're anxious, they're stressed. It could be anything going on for them. This is where empathy is so critically important to understand the underlying emotional drivers. Highly adaptive thinking, that's a real benefit. Remember what I said about emotions being processed through our emotional center of the brain first? Well, if you're feeling strong emotions, that's going to limit your higher thinking skills, your higher cognitive functions, like adaptive thinking, which is so critical in the sales process because you need to be able to think on your feet. That's the old term for adaptive thinking. And it's so important to be curious and practice looking for opportunities instead of just very narrow focus trying to get what you want out of a sale. So many times I have seen salespeople try to get a $10,000 sale when they could have got a $100,000 sale if they had been more curious and asked some more open-ended questions and let the buyer lead them into what their real needs are and what's driving that buying decision. And so being more agile and resilient is important, a resilient mindset, bouncing back from setbacks more quickly, understand emotional drivers, we talked about that, and build trust and loyalty. Build loyalty from trust, not political loyalty where you like me because I do things for you and that. It's more of a trust-based thing that we're looking at here. So I want to start to kind of bring this all together. And then I'm going to have an open-ended question and answer session for anybody that wants to talk about more information here, how they can get it. I want to go back for a minute to the book and just talk a minute about that. What's in the book? I want to be fair. It's literally a guide. It's easy to read and understand. I've kept it very light on the science side. So for those of you that doesn't excite on the science side, there is some science in there, and I'll explain what that is. At the first of every chapter, I have a portion which is called From Struggle to Strength. Basically, it's things that I've learned or other salespeople have learned over the years, things that they struggled with, but they found a way to turn that struggle into a strength. And it's very applicable no matter what your role is in revenue generation. The second thing and this is where a little bit of the science comes in, every chapter has a did you know, which is based in neuroscience. So some little tidbits about how the brain works, why it's important for us to understand those things. So there's a little bit of science in there. There's also what I call EQ fit moments, things that I have specifically learned, I've seen play out in hundreds of salespeople that I've worked with over the years, that is specific to the sales process. And it's kind of aha moments that really help us understand how we might be able to improve in a certain area, or adapt in certain ways, or create a better mindset, or whatever that infusion of EQ skills would be that would help us be more successful. And then I always have a coach's corner where I give some tips and ideas on how to put into play and into practice what we're talking about in a given chapter. Now, there's also some additional value to this, which is I've put in there links to free downloads. And there's quite a few of these free downloads that are specific to the EQ Fit Smart Selling process. And I don't want to go deeply into all of that, because this whole thing is not about selling a book today. I want to help people. The best way I know how to help people is to get a book out there that tells you how to do this stuff. But here's the key. You're not going to be the same as everybody else. Your type of sales may be different. Who you are, your personality, your background, your culture, your experience is going to be different. What I want this to be is something to help you empower your authentic self when it comes to whatever revenue generation that you're in right now. There are many different tools to download here that I think are very helpful. I know they have been, because they've been very helpful to other salespeople. So I'm going to draw this to a close right now. I would love to talk more about what's in the book and everything else, but just for a few minutes, if somebody has a question or a comment that they would like to share, please feel free to do that. And while we're doing that, I'm going to put this up here so you can see. Probably should have changed around the graphics so the link was in the bigger print, but you can see that where you can get the book. But I'm going to go back to the chat and just stay here for a couple of minutes and just say, hey, does anybody have anything they'd like to ask or talk about? Does this make sense to you? Is it helpful? What would you like to know more about? And I will continue doing these live events every few weeks, but I don't want to leave somebody with unanswered questions. I will leave it at that. I don't see a lot in the chat. I see a lot of comments. Don't see a lot of questions right now in the chat, and that's fine. If you want to take it further, if you want to explore more, I highly recommend go to Amazon, look at the book. I think you get to see on the Kindle version, I think you get to see the first 2 chapters. On the printed version, I think you get to see the first chapter. See if it makes any sense for you to look into that resource more. Again, my desire is to equip people to prosper. If you go to our EQ Fit website, that's the first thing you're going to see, equipping people to prosper. And so anything I can do to help with that, please feel free to reach out. As I've put up on the screen before, there is no cost, no obligation to have a conversation. Feel free to reach out to me at my email address. Thank you for being here today. If you're not here live, but you're watching this later, feel free to reach out as well. I'm more than happy to have those conversations. Thank you again.